I'm Renee Reizman. Thanks for tuning in today. I am an artist based in Los Angeles. I'm originally from Chicago, but I've been here for 9 years, and I am the artist in residence at the Los Angeles Department of Transportation. I'm the one and only in the city that gets that to say that, at least for the next year. So I'm just gonna talk about what I've been doing at LA Dot. And I wanted more of like a conversation kind of thing. See some more background on what I do as creative catalyst because it's such an unusual position. I'm really interested right now. It's like I have a social practice type of art style, and then we went into a pandemic, and at least in LA, we're all shut down, and I can't do a lot of in-person art practice, which is like my bread and butter. So it's like, what happens when a pandemic just like destroys all your plans? So here's my contact info in case you want to reach out to me. And let me explain. So the Creative Catalyst is an artist in residence program with the Los Angeles Department of Transportation. They launched it in 2017, and they had one artist for 1 year, and then they took a little break, and now I'm the second artist to ever have this position. I started in 2019. I'm actually wrapping up my first year like this weekend because I started right after Labor Day last year. And I have one more year left in the program. So the residency is like they embed an artist within the Department of Transportation. So my first 3 months were just researching the culture, having a desk in the office, going to a bunch of transit events, also went to a bunch of like internal meetings to learn about the culture and all our partners. And LA Dot is just so expansive in what they cover. They do everything from the road, planning our roads and traffic signals and sidewalk paint to operating like our bike share programs and our public transit routes. They run the Dash bus and a few other like paratransit for people with disabilities. And they're more about like the policy and the overall vision of transportation in Los Angeles. They're actually separate than Metro, which is like the big orange buses we see everywhere. So Metro is about the actual public transit, like buses and maintenance and system. And LA Dot is like the bigger picture, the big vision and all that. When I was brought on, it was supposed to be more for Vision Zero, which is this campaign to end deaths by automobile collision by 2025. And they do that via infrastructural improvement. So rather than making like bus shelter PSAs, it's like they study the streets and they analyze activity, and the engineers will define the areas that have the most collisions and accidents, and then the planners will work to make those streets safer. So let's say there's an intersection in Compton where there's been like 3 deaths in a year. It's like disproportionately high. They study the street and they realize it's too wide. There's no stop sign. There's no light. The planners will take that data and start adding those features to make the streets safer. And one of the things they really learned with DOT is that slower speeds are probably the most effective way to help people, as well as getting cars off the road. But it's LA, and convincing people that they don't have to drive anymore is a huge task. So it's like, how do you spread this message of like, let's drive less in this big car city? And so some of my art, which usually is about infrastructure anyways, I'm trying to be like, okay, how can we start thinking and convincing people that they should drive left, or that we should reduce a lane in their community, or that we should add more signage that will delay their commute? Like, how do we get people to stop thinking car first, people are second, and more people occupy streets and then cars just happen to be there? So it's a big ask. And when I started this position, I had all these ideas for in-person big events, and then the coronavirus happened. And you couldn't safely do any of these projects anymore because you can't meet in person, you can't have large gatherings, you can't like touch objects that other people have touched, and you can't breathe in their faces. And so I was right about to start on a project in March, and then we shut down, and then it was like, okay, we have to scrap all the ideas and retool them, or like re-envision them. So like, thank God this was a 2-year residency and not 1 year, because that would not have been good. So what we did was we set up this hotline where people could share their stories about how coronavirus has affected their commutes, or just their experience in the city while being safer at home. So were you still on public transit? Were you still going to work as an essential worker? We realized that biking was actually up because there was less traffic and people like don't bike in LA. So that was a really cool thing. We noticed people were walking around their neighborhood more than ever just because they needed to get out of the house. And a lot of that with new exercise routine is, yeah, with all the gyms closed, people were starting to exercise outside and filling up the parks and the streets in ways they had never done before. So even if people were like, well, I'm at home all day, I'm not actually commuting or transit, I don't have a story, we realized there actually were so many different ways of telling how your life had changed since coronavirus. So this hotline was a way to collect some stories from people and hear about what was different in their life, even if it just meant going to the grocery store was a new experience. This hotline was set up in advance and ran through an event that I did called the Transformation Through Transportation, which was a 24-hour telethon spread over 3 days. And what we did was we used the telethon fundraising format of having like me in between every act, and then having different people come on board for 1 hour-ish. You know, we had 20, I think it ultimately was 28 artists for 24 hours. But this was a way to use every different slot to talk about different issues about transportation, COVID-19, and actually we talked about Black Lives Matter, police brutality, and other current event issues that were coming up, because this happened right around the protests. This was at the end of June. It was supposed to be earlier and it kept getting postponed, especially as the civil unrest got more intense across LA. But we were like, we can't just ignore the issues. We can't have a transportation event and act like transportation is not a political apparatus. I mean, the city used buses to detain protesters during the first few events. They closed down streets so cars couldn't go through. Protesters took over highways as well, and so they closed down streets. So the idea that transportation or any infrastructure cannot be a political tool is actually like completely untrue. And so we use our artists' time slots to kind of talk about different ways that streets are a transformative tool for protest, for free speech, for unrest, as well as all the coronavirus issues that made us shut down. And coronavirus too, political. One of the calls we got in was really cool, was really interesting. We got a call from, they didn't leave their name, but they were a bus rider, a public transit rider. And because of the coronavirus, the bus schedules went from like the frequency that it normally does to a Saturday, Sunday schedule, but like every day during the week. And the buses also had to be safely social distanced for a time. And so this rider was handicapped and late to work and wasn't allowed on a dash bus because there were already like 15 people on it, 10 to 15, which was the max ridership. And so he got denied, had to wait for the next bus, which was already running slower because it was on the weekend schedule. And it was just like this whole sad story. And I think that, you know, the city doesn't really want to see itself represented that way. However, that's the thing that happened. And whether it was a misunderstanding or not, you know, that person's day was affected by a bus schedule. And so think about the ripple effect that can come just by like missing a bus. And then thinking about the person that was denied was low income, disabled, English as a second language. And so all these things that you would not think of as like political issues and identity issues, they all become enrolled into this, how changing a bus schedule disproportionately disenfranchises people of certain demographics. So that is what I did. And now we're going to launch our new project. And I have a big work in progress bubble on the event because we are not confirmed for everything, but we're looking at September 19th, fingers crossed, it's coming up super soon. But we're actually going to do a tour of town halls across the city. We're going to bring the bus to you in different parts of Los Angeles. So we're going to start in Pacoima in late September before the census is due because there's very low census enrollment there. And what we're going to do is we're going to take our bus and have some speakers on the bus, and we're going to park somewhere in town and we're going to have panel discussions about transportation and how it connects to certain issues, and hopefully get people to participate and talk to us and serve tacos and try to make it like a cool social event. And you know, we're going to neighborhoods where people actually really don't participate in city council meetings very often. I think they feel unheard or that their opinion doesn't count, or maybe there's the language barrier, the work barrier, the physical barriers, like, you know, the fact that you would have to drive all the way downtown at 12 p.m. on a Tuesday to voice your opinion is not actually the most democratic thing in the world. So what I wanted to do with this small group of people is talk about what a town hall tour might look like, maybe things that if you were attending an event like this, or if you heard about an event like this, what would make you want to come to it? What are discussions and topics that you don't really get to voice in your city but think would be nice to talk about? Yeah, so for the end of my presentation, I mostly just wanted to open up that discussion.
Just wondered where that bus is going to go in Pacoima.
Yeah, so right now that's kind of where we're discussing the possibility of where it could go. Right now we were talking about they have the San Fernando Gardens, which is like an area up there. That was one of the options. And then we also were thinking about the Valley Food Bank, but we noticed there weren't any food bank events on the weekend that we want to do the event. So we're kind of like, well, we would rather go to an event where people are already congregating and capture them there. The other interesting about Pacoima is that it's majority Spanish speaking audience, and unfortunately my primary language is English. So we're looking at hiring a translator to make the entire event bilingual, and so that way you can ask questions and participate in whatever your native language is, or, well, I guess Spanish. I don't think we'll have multiple translators of different languages, but we're trying to find a way to make it really inclusive so that if you do show up, you don't feel alienated and be like, why are these people here in my neighborhood speaking English and I don't care because it's not about my community, but it is about their community. The events will also, I guess I forgot to mention, we're going to partner with DubLab, the radio station around LA, and they're going to simultaneously radio broadcast our events on their website. It's just like a live stream. So even though they're hyper local events for the community, people can tune in and listen, and then probably use social media hashtags to ask questions if they want to participate remotely. But, you know, one of the challenges is that, again, with social distancing, we can't set up tables and chairs. We can't pass around microphones. We can't really like touch people and get that close to them in what normally would be more of an intimate conversation. But Pacoima has been doing some kind of like taco social events to help people like fill out the census and get free food, because free food always attracts people. And so we were thinking about partnering with that event to get people who might already just want to be there for food and chatting and then have this conversation at the same time. And we're also going to have a really strong Wi-Fi hotspot because, again, like people, at least in that neighborhood, a lot of them don't have internet access, or at least it's not very reliable. You know, money's tight right now and you have to stop paying your bills, so you're going to pay for your phone, but maybe not your home internet. And so the bus has a really, like a stronger than usual hotspot, because I know when you're on your bus, sometimes the internet barely works. It's like a better one. And so we're also just hoping people can gather and sit down and just check their email or something. And so while while the most ideal is to have this like really intense, robust conversation, I think just setting up an environment where people can like get food, get shade, use the internet, listen about what the census can do for their neighborhood. I hopefully it'll just help people feel like the city cares about them and that we want to hear their opinion and we want to reach out to them. So there's still a lot of moving parts, so it's kind of nuts.
Hi, this is Dorothy. I live in France, but I used to live in Kailua, Hawaii, which we had a lot of meetings about like smart growth and trying to improve the community. And one of the big issues was, I mean, you could get people come initially, but it was, what are people going to actually do with the input? And otherwise, it just feels like it's kind of, you know, window dressing or something, having the community involvement, and there's no promise to actually listen.
That's a good point. We definitely are trying to think of a concrete ask or a concrete like result from every event. So at least with the first one, we know that we want people to actually fill out the census and see if we can encourage people to do that and understand why it's so important. The neighborhood we're going into is super, super underreported and unrepresented. And so if you don't do the census and you don't have an accurate count, you get less funding for your neighborhood. So that will help people hopefully understand that if you do this form, you can actually maybe boost your funding for your schools and your parks and your transit and your arts and culture. But that is a really good point because we want to do 7 events total. And so for the other 6, we need to think of very concrete ways of being like, what are you getting out of this? And why are we listening to you? And I think our second event is going to actually be like a how to participate in local government. And it'll give people like actual concrete suggestions of like, how do you sign up to speak at a meeting? And how, if you do see like a pothole in your street, how do you do the steps to make sure we actually fill it for you? And other ways of reaching out to government and actually getting concrete responses from us, because usually the people with the time and resources to come to meetings and participate in government and do their studies and their funding and stuff, they're already people that are pretty well off or pretty privileged. And a lot of the communities that don't interact either feel like they don't have time for it or they can't make change. And so I'm hoping with our second event that we can actually like help people learn like how to harness the power of local government